Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Well, Elon Musk is now the richest person on the planet.
More than half the satellites in space are owned and controlled by one man.
Starting his own artificial intelligence company.
Well, he's a legitimate super genius. I mean, legitimate.
He says he's always voted for Democrats, but this year it will be different. He'll vote Republican.
There is a reason the U.S. government is so reliant on him.
Elon Musk is a scam artist, and he's done nothing.
Anything he does is fascinating to people.
Welcome to Elon Inc., Bloomberg's weekly podcast about Elon Musk. It's Tuesday, November 19th. I'm your host, David Papadopoulos. So it's somehow been just 14 days since the election, but oh, how busy they've been for Elon Musk, who still seems to be basically living at Mar-a-Lago, racking up invites from foreign leaders, watching his wealth soar, and weighing in loudly on Trump's cabinet appointees. All the while, his social media company X steadily loses users to rival Blue Sky. And we're going to get right into all of this with our very own Musk cabinet. Ace reporter Dana Hull. Hey there, Dana.
Hey, hey.
Kurt Wagner, who covers social media for us here at Bloomberg. Hey, Kurt.
Hi, David.
Hey. And then Max Chafkin, who around here feels a little like Musk at the Mar-a-Lago oceanfront pool.
Elon Musk. Elon. What a job. What a job he does. And he happens to be a really good guy. You know, he likes this place. I can't get him out of here. He just likes this place. And you know what? I like having him here, too. He's good. He's done a fantastic job. Really an incredible mind, and he's an unbelievable entrepreneur, sort of everything. I'm asking him, what do you do best? And we were not able to figure it out, but it's a lot of things.
Hey, Max.
David, I trust that my confirmation hearing will be smooth and uneventful.
Yes, it shall. All right, we're going to dive right into it. The Trump trade is working out spectacularly so far for Elon Musk. As you look at the numbers so far, his wealth is now up to $326 billion, according to the Bloomberg terminal, which is about $100 billion more than his closest rival, who would be Jeff Bezos. Tesla stocks are up about a third since the election, several hundred billion. And XAI and SpaceX are cutting deals at record high valuations. So, you know, Kurt Wagner, in the run-up to the vote, on this show and in other places, there was a lot of hand-wringing and wondering about whether Musk was neglecting his companies and neglecting his shareholders during the campaign by spending so much time campaigning for Trump, and that he was essentially undermining these companies. I guess those numbers, as it strikes me at least, those valuations, put a rest to all of that. The money speaks for itself, does it not, Mr. Wagner?
To an extent, I think it does, right? I mean, this is a man who has built a reputation on making massive bets. And this is a massive bet that he made that is paying off handsomely, right? He picked Donald Trump. He put the full weight of his wealth, the full weight of his time, his reputation behind him. Trump is now president again. Elon is, you know, the most powerful non-elected person probably in the world. And he's reaping the benefits that come with that, right? And that includes the buoyancy of his you know, companies and the idea that because he's close to the president, because he has the president sort of in his ear, he's going to be able to, you know, get the type of regulation he wants. He's going to get the types of deals that he wants. He's going to get the relationships that he wants. And all of those things are beneficial to Elon Inc. and the world of Elon Musk. And we're seeing that, as you point out, in the valuations.
Yeah, and we're gonna get into the breakdown item by item of what is pushing up that valuation, Max.
I mean, he's absolutely neglecting his companies. There's like no question that he has spent the last month or so doing nothing but hang around Donald Trump and go to campaign events and focus on this election. Now, I think the bet that the investors are making, as Kurt's saying, is that he's gotten a lot for his companies. And you know, you could make an argument, right, that maybe having a guy who kind of is impulsive, who's let's just put this generously, an unconventional manager, has, penchants for outbursts of anger, erratic decision-making. Maybe it's better for him to be, kind of operating at a high level, doing the kind of political diplomacy that could help a company of Tesla's size or a company of SpaceX's size. And that's the bet that they're making. But I also think we should not just assume that the market has any idea whether this is good or bad for Tesla yet. This is a bet that investors are making, amid a moment of a lot of exuberance. And, we'll see. Tesla stock, as we talk about all the time, it swings a lot on this podcast.
So, Dana, Kurt, I wonder on that point, are there any signs inside Musk's companies that all the time he is spending in Pennsylvania, now in Mar-a-Lago, that top executives at those companies are now empowered to do more, make decisions on their own? Is there any implicit or explicit message, yes, go ahead and do that, or is it too soon for that?
I mean, listen, Musk has always run so many companies that his executives have always been kind of empowered to do stuff without him. Like at SpaceX, Gwen Shotwell clearly runs the day-to-day. At Tesla, there aren't really that many named executive officers. And in the past, people would always complain that there were bottlenecks because they were waiting for Elon to sign off on stuff. But Tesla's a profitable company. It kind of runs. It's they make cars, they sell cars. He's more focused on robotics and AI. The basic, work of running a factory. He's no longer sleeping on the floor or whatever. So I just think that we, as a news or operation, need to kind of stop looking for these points of. Everyone wants the narrative that shit is falling apart because Elon is doing politics. And frankly, it's not now you have the whole Trump administration on X. X is doing fine. I don't know. I just sort of feel there's a desire to find these points of tension and friction that might be premature because...
Well, we're journalists, and journalists, by definition, that's what we do. We look for points of friction and tension. But I guess that implicit in that answer is that the CEO role doesn't matter. Then why the hell do I need a CEO?
I think it matters different at different companies, right? So when you're the CEO of 6 different businesses that are all... at various stages, but for the most part, relatively established. Yeah, maybe you don't necessarily need a traditional hands-on CEO, right? But that's going to be very different when you have a startup or something like that. I guess I would maybe echo what Dana's saying and just add, I think it's too early, right? This is already someone who was spread incredibly thin well before Trump showed up into the picture for him. He's never been someone who's hey, I'm going to be at the office from 9 to 5, pop by for office hours or whatever. That's just not how he operates anyways. And so adding this other, I don't even want to call it a hobby, obviously, because it's much bigger than that, but adding this other commitment to his plate is obviously it's a big deal, but at the same time, his companies are used to only getting fractions of his time. And so I think it's too soon to say whether this is going to have a long-term impact.
There's a lot of irrational exuberance right now. I would like to point out that SpaceX is going to launch a Starship rocket this evening, and President Trump is going to go to that launch, as is the new FCC nominated chair, Brendan Carr. So you might even see the entire Trump cabinet or everyone from Mar-a-Lago at this launch. So I think that for Elon, that is really good. And he's neglecting his companies perhaps on the day-to-day, but just the sort of fact that this whole Republican entourage is now hanging out with Elon, flying around with Elon, going to the UFC fight with Elon. He is basking in the glow of that adulation, which he never got from the Biden administration, as we have talked about many times. And so for a guy who really likes the dopamine hit of adulation and feeling like he's in power and feeling appreciated, to have the president-elect come to his launch is a huge thing for him.
Let me just say this, that all those things, Max, you said are correct. We shall see ultimately where Tesla and these other companies from an operating basis go from here in the coming months and years, and whether Elon Musk, spending so little time of late with them ultimately hurts them or not. But if I'm a shareholder in the company, He's just added, in Tesla, for instance, he's just added several hundred billions of dollars to the value of the company. I am thrilled. And if I have those long-term concerns, you know what I do? I just sell the stock at an incredible profit right now.
Absolutely. And one thing I'll say that I think what the market is telling us is that there were a lot of reports even before the election, but then definitely after, kind of skeptical about, hey, how long can this Trump-Musk bromance last? They are so high on each other's presence. And I think what we're seeing, to Dana's point, is it's lasting so far, right? Musk is in the inner circle. He has not been pushed out. If anything, he has gotten closer to Trump over the last 14 days than he was after the election.
And that is true. It is holding for now. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on because there are some signs here and there, some fraying. But I first do want to go through item by item. If one is to make sense of this enormous spike in the valuations of his companies in terms of what a Trump administration can bring about for Elon Inc., let's do that now. So, Dana, the first thing that comes to mind and I need to ask you about is the possibility, as has been floated in recent days, that the Trump administration brings about some sweeping new rules to autonomous vehicles, helping pave the way for Elon to roll out, what are we calling it? Cybercab. Tell us a bit about that.
So as you all recall, back in April, Elon Musk basically fired 20% of Tesla's staff and completely pivoted the company. They're no longer chasing volume of electric cars. The future is all about autonomy and AI and the robotaxi. And on an earnings call, Musk said very clearly, if President Trump is elected, I'm really hoping for kind of a streamlined federal process when it comes to autonomous vehicles instead of this patchwork regulatory quilt where one city has one rule and another state has another rule. And that is very clearly one of his asks. And I think that just basically a streamlined, very fast track kind of regulatory regime is really what Elon wants. And now he's probably going to get it.
There was a report to that effect that, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, our colleague David Welsh broke the story over the weekend that the Trump transition team was floating possibly Emil Michael, who used to work at Uber as a potential DOT secretary. Now we know that he is not the cabinet elect, but we don't know yet who's going to end up running NHTSA, for example.
Just a couple things. Yeah, Trump did not pick the guy that Elon seemed to want, Emil Michael, who's basically, an ex-Uber executive, former Silicon Valley guy. Seems like of all the people who could possibly just kind of ram this through, he'd be the most likely to do it. I have to say, the guy that Trump did pick doesn't have any track record of, or as far as I could find in a quick search since the pick was announced, of talking about autonomous vehicles. And I would be skeptical that the Trump administration is going to spend a ton of political capital on this. And the other thing is,
would it take a ton of political capital?
So the Bloomberg story we published is really good. It explains that there are some rules that they could change, but they would need an act of Congress to really make the cybercab happen on any kind of big scale. And I think that the problem here, which was the problem before Trump was elected, is that you can have the best regulatory framework, the biggest, most beautiful, most glorious. It could be like the toilet seat of Mar-a-Lago equivalent of regulatory frameworks. And you need a cybercab. You need a working car to make use of these regulations. And again, it's not totally clear that has happened. So again, this all feels very hypothetical. We've got maybe there's going to be some kind of thing that's going to happen to make Elon Musk happy on the regulatory side, but then Tesla would have to turn around and take advantage of it somehow.
Right. It could actually backfire because you could no longer blame regulatory approval for the delay. If they got this fast track regulatory approval, Elon, they'd have to actually start an operation.
Dana, next up, the sunsetting of EV tax rebates for car buyers.
Yeah, so the $7,500 federal tax credit for buying an electric vehicle has been a huge part of the Inflation Reduction Act and really kind of encouraged a lot of consumers who maybe weren't thinking about an EV to buy a car. And the Trump administration has floated about sunsetting that. Elon says that he's okay with that. And I think that he's right in that Tesla, by virtue of their volume, and can do a lot with pricing, and they don't need the credits as much as their rivals do because Tesla is already profitable. Mm-hmm. Now, would losing the credit hurt their gross margin? Absolutely, but it's really going to hurt rivals. And so, Elon might be willing to kind of go ahead with this because it would just allow Tesla's moat to get so much better. I mean, you have like GM and Ford, they poured so much money into trying to forecast the EV market going forward. And they keep having to rewrite their playbook and like scale back their ambitions. And it's so frustrating for them because like with every administration, things wax and wane, whereas like Tesla is the dominant player in the US. They're going to basically be able to sort of, continue that moat. And they still get a lot of funding from the IRA for manufacturing, for installing superchargers. I mean, I could see, Tesla just basically like the credit goes away. Tesla just slashes prices, which we've seen Elon do in the past. And like, I don't think that the credit is that big of a deal, to be honest. I think that Elon would be happy to see it go away.
I guess I would point out that this is not the only sort of industry or major tech company that is almost pushing for more regulation, or in this case, fewer benefits in order to benefit them. It's counterintuitive, right? So I would point out that Meta, which owns Facebook, Instagram, for years has been saying, hey, regulate us, regulate the tech, regulate the social networking industry. And on the surface, you think, why would they ever want more regulation, right? This would hurt them. Well, it's because, as we pointed out, same with Tesla, they're in such a dominant position that any regulation they can deal with, they have the resources, they have the talent, they have the time to deal with it easily, but it will close the door for a number of competitors. It will make it harder for competitors to catch up to them, right? It's still a growing and somewhat new industry, the EVs, but like it's much more mature than when Elon started this out, right? So like there is a dominant player, which didn't exist when he was first going. And so I think that's why this counterintuitive idea actually makes a lot of sense for him.
Max, another thing that is helping Musk's empire is the idea, it's been floated, or I guess Trump has said he would like Brendan Carr to chair the FCC. Why is this positive for Elon Inc.?
Brendan Carr is a longtime Elon Musk fan. And in particular, he's expressed appreciation for Elon Musk in all sorts of respects. But the FCC is an important regulator for Starlink, which is a subsidiary of SpaceX. And, one of Elon Musk's big frustrations with the Biden administration is that there is a lot of money for rural broadband internet, and that money has not gone to him. There are a couple of programs, and Carr has been very outspoken about the need to change that. And I actually think this is the way, like much more than autonomous vehicles or some of these other things that rely on a lot of hypotheticals.
Brendan Carr.
This is a way, this is like a way that Elon Musk can put money directly towards his top line, revenue from the government to Starlink. And part of the reason it's more plausible is because Elon Musk has like a real plausible case for it.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. Is there a good, legitimate case that Starlink deserves that money just as much as these other companies do?
It's complicated. I've done a little bit of reporting on this, and there's some analysts out there who've been looking at this and talking about it as a possibility. Elon Musk's argument is essentially the satellites are going to get better, and no one really knows how true that is, or to what extent they're going to get better. Are they going to get better enough? And like that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. But there is a case for satellites. Like you could roll these, like give people Starlinks is a lot cheaper than laying out fiber. The question is like when you try to do it on a mass scale, how does that work? And I think from a sort of Elon point of view, he gets two things out of this. One is potentially more revenue, but the second is it slows down these traditional telecom operators that were counting on government subsidies for their own, rollout of rural broadband. So this is like a definite win for Elon. I think Brendan Carr is like the biggest win he's had so far, even bigger than getting named as the co-chair of Doge, and certainly better than these kind of, sort of vague reports that the Trump administration is sympathetic to autonomous vehicles. Because again, we don't really know. It's a little hard to figure out how that would benefit Elon, at least in the short term.
The other thing I wanted to jump in on is that Carr has advocated a ban on TikTok, citing national security concerns because of China, and that could also benefit Elon because as X adds more video capacity, they're really rivals with TikTok. So I think when we look at all of these cabinet appointments, it's really important to sort of think about how they benefit Musk, not just in one company, but sort of across all companies. And Brendan Carr is going to go to the SpaceX launch today also.
It should be noted, I guess, that Elon has claimed he doesn't want a TikTok ban, right? He's sort of like, hey, this is against free speech. This would be a bad thing. But as Dana very smartly points out, like, he's saying that. In reality, I think TikTok not being in the picture would ultimately benefit X. So he might say he doesn't want it, but when push comes to shove, I'm sure he'd happily, accept a lot more attention coming towards X.
Yeah, more on X in a moment. Max, thank you very much for bringing up DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. We are absolutely, dear listeners, going to be talking more about DOGE in coming weeks and months. But I want to, Dana, before we move on to X, ask you this. Max earlier had said that so far the Trump-Musk relationship seems to be holding up just fine, and that indeed seems to be the case. But at the same time, there are signs of fracture or at least tension emerging, reports of insiders in the Trump team bristling at how Musk is acting, quote, as a co-president to Trump. And I wonder if you feel like these are just initial bumps in the road and the cost of doing business with Trump, or a sign that things might come to a head sooner rather than later.
I think it's kind of BS, to be honest. I mean, the Trump team is famously leaky, right? And right now you've got all these people in Mar-a-Lago, like, jockeying for position and jockeying for power. And, like, there's this whole, like, fight about who's going to be the Treasury Secretary, and different camps are leaking things to different things. And, yeah, like, oh, there was, like, a dust-up at a dinner with, like, Boris, what's his name? Or, like, whatever. Like, Trump is going to the SpaceX launch today. Like, that is what matters. Like, I used to cover politics, and I just don't take these kind of, like, thinly sourced reports in certain outlets that seriously. Like, Elon and Trump have been thick as thieves for the past, like, 6 weeks. And until there's, like, a real rupture, I just don't really buy it. I'm sure that some, like, old school Trump loyalists are maybe bristling at the fact that Elon is around. But, like, you're seeing photographs of, like, Trump and Don Jr. and the Speaker of the House and RFK and Elon, like, all on the plane eating McDonald's together. Like, there's no rupture. Yeah. I've always just been very skeptical of a lot of political reporting because of that.
All that is fair, but Max, Trump has, on a couple of occasions, including the clip we played at the beginning of the show, he has publicly started taking swipes at Elon.
Yeah, I got to agree with everything Dan said here.
Jesus.
I'm sorry, David. I know that's not what you want to hear, but here's the thing.
Kurt, like, help me out here.
There are other constituencies within this transition who obviously have an interest in marginalizing Elon. And so there are other sources of power here. And if you just look at, like, the top line, like, who's at the McDonald's table, like, I think that's a pretty good indication. Now, and what I will say is, yes, in the past, and we get into this in the episode that's forthcoming of Citizen Elon, there have been signs like this before where Trump is sort of preparing to, like, shiv someone, and he will start making these kind of cracks, right? And it's like a way to kind of open the door. And maybe that's possible. It could also be that it's a warning to Elon. It's like, listen, you need to work with me. You don't get too big for your britches. It could also be a signal to some other part of Trump's coalition who he's trying to placate. We just, like, don't know what is going on. And I really think there are a lot of people who are, like, taking lessons from the past Trump administration, which makes sense. But I also think we need to look at Elon. And this is not as much about, to me anyway, this is not as much about, can Trump live in a world where there's Elon Musk in his inner circle? It's, can Elon Musk be sufficiently subservient? And I think before this, like, last few months of political adventure with Elon, I would say no freaking way. But over the last 3 months, Elon has proven himself willing to let Trump lead. And until we see a difference, then, I'm going to assume that's going to continue.
Okay, very good. Kurt, let us talk about the exodus, users leaving X. Things are going swimmingly, as we just stated, or at least for the market values of many of his companies in his empire. Not so much right now for X. Users are leaving. Tell us what's going on.
It's this weird sort of like Jekyll and Hyde situation at X right now, which is, it is more politically and culturally important than it has been since Elon bought the company, right? Like, this is the most relevance X has had as a social network and as a sort of distributor of Donald Trump's agenda and news and information. At the same time, it is probably maybe the weakest it has been from a user standpoint, right? Because after the election, we saw all of these people basically throwing in the towel on X and saying, I'm done with this place. And we've seen that reflected in the numbers of two rivals, Meta's Threads and Blue Sky. And with Blue Sky in particular, it's been really interesting because Blue Sky's been around for a couple of years. It had a lot of attention when it first launched. And then it sort of went quiet for a while. I think a lot of people were just like, that's not it. That's not the place. We'll just kind of let it sit over there. And it's added, I think it was at 10 million users in September. The week after the election, it added about 1.5 million. And in the week since then, so, week 2 after the election, I believe it's added about 5 million users. And so it's now close to 19 million, up from 10 million in September, as I mentioned. It's almost doubled in size in just a couple of months. And if you go to Blue Sky, I think the most telling thing is that your feed is going to be full of people basically saying, hey, I'm new here, just came over from X, leaving that place behind. Tell me who to follow. Tell me what to do. Like, how do I use this thing? Like, ha, 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 right? But the idea being that all of these people are migrating to a new network because they no longer want to be associated with X. And so I think that is anecdotal, of course, but I think that paired with the rising user numbers of these two competitors sort of tells a picture that, X is having a bit of a user growth or user retention issue at the moment.
And Blue Sky has a lot of high usage people, like Lizzo is now on Blue Sky, and epidemiologists and climate scientists, like all of my energy peeps have moved to Blue Sky. And I think the other big thing driving this is that X changed its term of service. So as of November 15th, if you're using X, you're basically allowing them to use your content to feed into XAI and language models. And so the change of the terms of service is actually what kind of inspired a lot of people to start not just leaving X, but downloading their tweets and then deleting them. So that's another interesting part of this. It's just people realizing that they don't want Elon having their content. And I mean, Max and I go back and forth about this a lot. I struggle with my presence on X because on the one hand, I feel like I need to be there because that's now where the incoming Trump administration is. All of the cabinet people, that's where a lot of people who are now going to be in power are posting. So I feel like I have to at least lurk. But I have also joined Blue Sky, and I hope you will find me there.
Okay, I shall.
We need an Elon Inc. starter pack.
There we go. Some X, is Blue Sky's gain X's loss, or are there signs that indeed they are, for every one liberal user that walks out the door, they are being replaced by conservative users? And even if that's not the case, does it exactly matter for X? You've drilled into my head in recent weeks that we need to rethink our understanding of X and its role in the Musk empire.
Yeah, I mean, both things can be true, like Kurt said. He's right. X has never been more relevant, at least not in the last 5 years, than it is today. And we don't know what the value of X is. I think, we talked about this on the last episode, the models of Elon's net worth rely on fidelities, markdown. If I were a shareholder of X, I would be marking that way the hell up because clearly, association with Elon amid a Trump administration, whether or not it translates to actual, business is valuable according to the market. After the election, we saw all of these CEOs, guys who had kind of been on the fence, go and sort of kiss the ring to Trump. And they all did it on X, right? They all, Satya Nadella, Sundar Pichai, Jeff Bezos, all the sort of tech guys who wanted to kiss up to Donald Trump went on X. They called him President Trump, even though he's president-elect. And of course, they did it on Elon Musk's platform. And so clearly, it's like the Trump hotel of social networks. If you want to be in this orbit, you got to be there. And I think, and even saying that probably understates it because it is a really important piece of the right-wing media ecosystem right now, maybe the most important piece. But what I'll say is, right-wing media has always relied on this relationship with quote unquote mainstream media. And what X had going for it before the election was you still had a lot of mainstream journalists there. You had a lot of mainstream news organizations, despite the fact that Elon Musk, the owner and now a key advisor to the president-elect, is going out there every day saying really bad things about media, saying that they're the opposition, they're terrible, and making tweaks algorithmically into the business that are harming those companies' business. It's really only a matter of time before mainstream media outlets try to find a different outlet. And I think what we're seeing now is some of that happening. Some of these, you have a lot of journalists, a lot of media outlets suddenly like paying attention to Blue Sky. And if that happens in a big way and X doesn't respond, that I think will hurt X in the long run. Because conservative media, as much as it is its own ecosystem, as much as there is a big audience there, part of what makes the most successful conservative media plays work is that they're able to kind of straddle both sides of it, but both the like hardcore activists as well as kind of the middle, the kind of mainstream audience.
Could I just add real quickly? I mean, there's this idea that like, is X going to be relevant if it's just right-leaning sort of Trump fans without, liberal folks to poke and prod or whatever, right? Like we've heard that for kind of years. I would point you to Truth Social, right? Like what is Truth Social? It is right-leaning Trump supporters without anybody to really poke and prod. And I would argue Truth Social, other than basically being a glorified way for Trump to release press releases, has almost no relevance in general kind of modern internet culture, right? Like it is truly just like Trump press release 2.0 service. And so I do think for X to stay relevant, they sort of need not, people from both sides of this political spectrum to care about what's happening on this service, because otherwise it does become very kind of echo chambery, isolated. And I'm just not sure that it's going to jump off the internet onto television and radio and podcasts in the way that it has historically, if it becomes very, very one-sided.
Max, so one thing I've learned over decades covering finance is that marks, when you're marking the value of a private asset, not a publicly traded asset, private marks are a dark art. Okay, they are a dark art. And so if you happen to have a little cut of that, stock in X and you want to mark it up, go ahead, man, mark that thing up.
I do think like combo of Trump being president and the stock market where it is, it's not out of the realm of possibility that X could return to the public markets one day and even return at a valuation that might be at least much higher than its current super depressed value.
In the abstract, that does seem plausible. But Kurt, are there any signs of any kind that there's any buzz among the banker investing community that, man, let me get my hands on some of them X shares?
So I agree with Max. I think when Fidelity comes out with its next report, which will probably be
go up
3 weeks from now or whatever, we can talk about when it does. I would be shocked if the value isn't up, right? If it isn't up noticeably, only because, as Max pointed out, being associated with Elon and therefore being associated with Trump tends to signal we think, we're a buyer of this type of thing. At the same time, if I'm Elon and X, the last thing I think I want to do is go public right now and expose how poor the business is. Yeah, but I think, this is not a strong business. I continue to firmly believe that this is not a good business, right? Like it is a good cultural weapon in some ways for Elon and Trump. But, there was a report, David, you may have seen last week, that all of these big blue chip advertisers had returned. I wrote some of them down. It was like IBM, Disney, Comcast, Warner Brothers. And it was like, they're no longer paused. They're spending on X again. Like, this is huge. And then you look into the report, all of those companies combined spent $3.3 million on advertising over 9 months. It was down 98% from 2023. So my point being is that even though they're trying to create
But wait a minute. Well, what about the Cheech and Chong gummies? Kurt, tell me about the Cheech and Chong gummies. Those have to
You are single-handedly keeping those guys afloat, David. We've talked about this. You need to stop those impulse buys.
I am a lifelong Cheech and Chong fan. It's true.
I feel like I'll get off my soapbox here, but I just feel like the idea that this is a strong business is yet to be. Maybe I will be wrong, and we've all been proven wrong by Elon at one point or another, and this will be my big hill that I die on. But I don't believe right now that this is a very strong business, and it's not something you would want to say, hey, let's open up our books, let's go public, let's let investors get a look at how this is actually going, because I don't think it would go
I'm
well
down with that. I think that indeed the company has much greater value for Elon and his empire as a small private entity within it that does.
I agree.
That acts as its media arm. I'm being told by our producer Magnus that we are skipping the feud. We're skipping the feud. We don't have time for it.
Sounds like there is a feud, you and the producers.
We have to, every once in a while, we have to listen to Magnus. Kurt, Dana, Max, thank you very much for joining.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having us.
Always a pleasure.
This episode was produced by Stacey Wong. Anna Masarakis is our editor, and Rayhan Harmansi, our senior editor. The idea for this very show also came from Rayhan. Blake Maples handles engineering, and Emma Sanchez fact checks. Our supervising producer is Magnus Henriksen. The Elon Inc. theme is written and performed by Taka Yasuzawa and Alex Sugiura. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer, and Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. A big thanks, as always, to our supporters Joel Weber and Brad Stone. I'm David Papadopoulos. If you have a minute, rate and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. See you next week. Thanks for listening to the Elon Inc. podcast. If you never want to miss a story, become a Bloomberg.com subscriber today. Check out our special intro offer right now at Bloomberg.com/podcast offer, or click the link in the show notes. You'll also unlock deep reporting, data, and analysis from reporters around the world.